Yeah.
This partially abandoned state psychiatric and forensic hospital opened its doors way back in 1879. The approximate 143-year-old hospital had an enclosed campus-type setting measuring at over 200 acres and consisting of over 60 different buildings and structures, with the majority of them still remaining active for its original intention. The psychiatric hospital buildings were constructed in the cottage model, with separate structures built above ground and interconnected by a series of underground tunnels. This model allowed patients to be separated and treated according to their level of stability and daily functioning. The hospital treated both men and women with a vast array and variety of different mental health conditions and issues.
Is that a dentist chair? It's kind of cool.
Throughout the early 1900s, the hospital admitted around 2,500 patients every year. Most of the mentally ill patients lived in dormitory-style buildings, with each room holding 2 different patients. And if a patient was higher functioning and or stable on their medications, then they were awarded much more recreation opportunity, social interaction with other patients, and overall flexibility. And these higher level functioning patients were able to partake in occupation and recreation within different areas of the hospital, such as the bakery, the billiard room, the bowling alley, the church, the carpenter shop, the kitchen, the gym, the laundry room, and both farm and garden.
Yeah, you gotta go under here. It's in here.
Some of the patients were voluntarily committed to the hospital, but many patients were also criminally insane. In other words, this meant that the hospital did have a large population of patients that had committed serious crimes, such as murder, rape, and even cannibalism. The patients that were deemed criminally insane were separated from the others and were forced to live in much harsher conditions. There is both proof and documentation that the patients were treated much differently, often abused in any way imaginable, neglected, punished, and even used as guinea pigs. The patients were often restrained for long periods of time, used to perform new surgical operations, experimented on with different medications and injections, and even used for all types of unconsented patient experimentation. In the early 1900s, the first accusations came to light when the psychiatric hospital staff was accused of surgically experimenting on a handful of women who had their ovaries removed, as medical staff reported that this operation would help cure insanity. Some of the medical staff became so impressed with the value of castrating women as a therapeutic measure to treat insanity that they repeated the operation on many of the other women patients at the hospital. It was also during this same time period that several of the hospital's orderlies had also been accused of patient abuse. In 2 separate cases involving the orderlies, one elderly woman and one young man, each patient had their arm broken by the physically dominating orderlies. The elderly woman had her arm broken in several different places after she refused to take a bath. The young man also had his arm broken when orderlies pushed him to the ground and held him down using physical force. And yet another tragic case from the same time period was when another male patient passed away after an orderly physically beat him to death.
That's no joke medical equipment right there. Dr. Bunting. Paging Dr. Bunting. I don't think it goes anywhere nice. If somebody told me to open wide with that, I'd be like, no, I'm good.
From the initial early years throughout the 1940s, the hospital was certainly not immune to the same horrific experiences, conditions, and treatments that most of the other state psychiatric hospitals had. Many of the now considered barbaric forms of mental health treatment took place at this hospital. And although some of these same types of treatments are still being utilized today, back then the patients were not given a choice. They were often sedated, assaulted, harmed, and restrained. Many made comparisons that drew the parallels to human torture. Some of these atrocious treatments that the patients underwent at the hospital without their consent included electroshock therapy, insulin coma therapy, and lobotomies. In the 1950s and 1960s, much needed advancements in the treatment and care of the mentally ill began to transform many of the psychiatric hospitals, including this one. As the primary focus began to shift to antipsychotic medications, patient education, training, and more outpatient modalities, the hospital made significant improvements and soon became a model institution in the treatment and care of the mentally ill, especially within the criminally insane unit. Modern medications were said to have been the real difference maker, as they were able to help control and lessen the severity of many of the symptoms and behaviors often associated with mental illness. In addition to the growth in pharmacology, the hospital also implemented specialized treatment units for substance use, social rehabilitation, geriatrics, adolescents, and even forensics. There was a major emphasis on social and vocational rehabilitation to prepare patients for eventual community reentry. By the new millennium, the psychiatric hospital had largely proven itself to be a new standard of care, leaving most of its tragic and awful history behind. However, the hospital would soon be in the midst of controversy yet again. Following the early years of patient neglect, experimentation, and abuse, the hospital has been in the media in recent years for other reasons. In 1999, a psychiatric nurse was in a heated standoff with local police after being fired from the state hospital. He eventually opened fire on hostages, killing one hospital nurse and injuring another. The former nurse was eventually sentenced to life in the penitentiary. The psychiatric hospital was also in the news several times throughout the 2000s after an infamous murderer, despite much opposition and protest, may be released soon, as he has already been granted off-hospital ground privileges after being held at the hospital forensic unit for the criminally insane for over 40 years. He was convicted of the 1978 murders of his pregnant wife and their unborn baby. He then cut his wife's stomach open, removed the dead baby, before stabbing his other young daughter in the eye and then slitting his grandmother's throat. In 1980, he was found not guilty by reason of insanity and was committed to this state psychiatric hospital for an indefinite amount of time. At this time, the future of this partially abandoned state psychiatric hospital is grim. After already closing down several of the other programs and buildings in recent years, many hospital staff, leaders, lobbyists, and stakeholders are pushing to build a brand new modern state-of-the-art forensic psychiatric hospital nearby.
Holy shit. Look at this place. Wow. This is definitely one of the best medical rooms we've ever been in.
This would most certainly be the final straw for the already aging and deteriorating hospital. So only time will tell what happens with this controversial state psychiatric hospital.
Most people are on a boat right now for Labor Day weekend. We're inside a dirty ass hospital. I wouldn't have that either way.
This looks like it was, yeah, this used to be an operating room also. See the huge light and the cabinets for the medical supplies. But now they put a bunch of desks in here and some storage stuff.
Well, that's going to do it for today's video. We really hope that you all enjoyed it as much as we did. For more photos and other locations, please check out the website at abandonedcentral.com. And as always, don't forget, please subscribe to Abandoned Central on YouTube to get all of the latest videos. Thank you so much for all the continued support.